Hey everybody, welcome to the Mother Figures podcast. I'm Katelyn Darkangelo, founder and co-owner of Figure, Midwestern wife, and girl mom. I'm a dual certified pregnancy and postpartum trainer, majored in exercise science from the University of Michigan, earned my master in management degree from Duke University, and have been coaching in the fitness industry for over a decade. This podcast dives into all things pregnancy and postpartum fitness, especially in how to navigate strength and intensity training in these seasons. Whether you're in it yourself, trying to get pregnant, or coaching this population, you're in the right place. I'm excited to share personal experiences, client stories, guest interviews, and evidence-based strategies to give you the guidance, insights, and clarity needed to navigate these seasons with confidence. And with that, let's get rolling. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Mother Figures podcast. Today, I want to go over a question that I got this past week about downtraining, what it means, and how it is related to like pregnancy context. So the question was, at how many weeks do you start downtraining, and does that mean stopping lifting? In my head, I plan to just keep doing what I'm doing all the way through, but I'm really interested in maybe rest is more beneficial. Right now, I lift and walk. So this is kind of a loaded question. So I want to go into pelvic floor basics first and try to kind of make sense of that realm, and then it will make more sense for the context of downtraining during pregnancy. So in a nutshell, the pelvic floor has a bunch of different functions, and like the anatomy of it is pretty complex. But the pelvic floor itself is a muscle group. It's a group of muscles at the base of the pelvis. And just like any other muscle group, they can be lengthened and stretched and shortened or contracted. So pelvic floor goes through the same muscle anatomical ways that a normal muscle works. Another key role of the pelvic floor is to let things out and then also to keep things in. So things that we want to let out include things like pooping, peeing, babies. And when things are getting let out, we want the pelvic floor muscles to lengthen. And then when we want to keep things in, like we don't want to just be pooping and peeing our pants, we need that muscle group to contract and like shorten and almost like create this like sphincteric property. So like restricting things from being let out. So the fact that the pelvic floor is a muscle and muscles can lengthen and shorten. And also one of the main roles of the pelvic floor is to let things out and let things in. These two things are kind of starting the base of what downtraining is going to be for. Next, the pelvic floor is the base of our core system. And our core system is the system that is responsible for body stability. So if we didn't have muscles, connecting to the spine in the back and the pelvic floor at the bottom and like creating stability for the pelvis, our body would just be like a lump of logs. Like we would just be all over the place. So the pelvic floor is the base of that core system, which is helping stabilize our body. It has an anticipatory effect as well. So the pelvic floor actually turns on before we even take a step or move in any way, which means that it is a very active muscle group that we rely on even like subconsciously. It's so key, and our daily tendency is often to clench, tighten, squeeze, again, often subconsciously. Like if you see right now, maybe you're driving the car or sitting down, just see if you're like subconsciously just like squeezing your pelvic floor. Maybe you're doing dishes or walking around. Like if you try to purposely let go of the pelvic floor, like maybe you notice that you're already clenching super tight and you don't even know it, because this pelvic floor because this muscle group is so active throughout the day. A lot of times we can inadvertently create too much tension down there, and other things like stress or how much stress we're carrying in our body. That can also be a reason why we see a lot of contraction or tension in the pelvic floor muscle. So kind of taking all of these basics together, we need to have the ability to squeeze, tighten, and contract, because when we do things like sneezing, or if we have to pee really bad and we have to hold it in, we have to be able to tighten, contract, and constrict the pelvic floor. But we also need to be able to let the pelvic floor go or lengthen, which is often not a trained piece until you think about trying to get a baby to come out of the pelvic floor. And then you're like, okay, how do I get this pelvic floor to get out of the way? Because in birth, the uterus is what pushes the baby out. The pelvic floor actually has to get out of the way. The pelvic floor is not pushing your baby out. So we need to have some, work during pregnancy, downtraining, that is going to allow that pelvic floor to lengthen and get out of the way so that we can get our baby to come out. However, the issue a lot of times is when we have a higher load and our anatomy changes during pregnancy, our center of gravity changes, our pelvic floor, because it is the stability system, tends to overfire because, again, there's more pressure being placed down on it. And so the pelvic floor tends to, now this isn't in all cases, but in most cases, it tends to be over functioning and over tight. And that can lead to different issues like, incontinence, like pressure, prolonged pushing stages in pregnancy or in labor, and all of these kind of unwanted situations. I'm going to be talking mainly about pregnancy context today, but downtraining also has an effect in postpartum too, because of that overactive nature of the pelvic floor. So when we're clenching all the time, we're creating extra tension, and too much tension can also lead to pelvic floor symptoms. So downtraining, in a nutshell, brings full function, the lengthening and contracting properties of a muscle, so that the muscle can work as it should. So it does have context in postpartum, a lot of context actually. But because this question was directed mainly towards pregnancy, I kind of wanted to isolate my podcast episode there. So coming back to the questions in this text, the first question, there's 3 of them. One was, at how many weeks do you start downtraining during pregnancy? And so my short answer is like as soon as you learn about downtraining and its effects and how to do it, because it is always a good function to have. Like you want a full range of motion out of a muscle group. You don't want a muscle to just be squeezed. I always use the example of a bicep. You don't just go around walking with a clenched bicep all day. However, that's often what we see with the pelvic floor. We just walk around with a super clenched pelvic floor. We want that muscle group to be able to lengthen and shorten so that we can get the full range of motion and full muscular capacity out of the pelvic floor as possible to help reduce symptoms, get better muscle engagement, and potentially improve in performance too. Because if you think about it, if you're squeezing a bicep per se all day long, you're going to have a reduced capacity of that muscle over time because it's tired, it's worn out, it's not going to be able to do its job properly. Same thing with the pelvic floor. If we cannot learn how to lengthen and let go and, relax the pelvic floor muscles, it's going to have downstream effects of tension, which then has reduced muscular capacity and all this kind of stuff. So as soon as you hear or learn about downtraining, it's a good time to start. Ideally, in pregnancy, you train, downtraining properties as you go through pregnancy so you can grow with your body so it becomes a more natural function. But if it's not until, 3rd trimester that you learn about it, that's totally fine too. I personally, it's always good to do, but then starting in the 3rd trimester generally is when I like to start prioritizing downtraining in for birth prep related reasons. Again, to allow the pelvic floor to lengthen, allows us for a potentially better pushing phase. When the baby is coming out and we have this wall up against the bottom, it's going to make it harder for that baby to, be birthed. So if we can get that pelvic floor to learn how to naturally get out of the way, it can hopefully help the push phase of labor itself. And also, hopefully, we can reduce tearing risk because the muscle isn't as stiff. It's able to go into its full range of motion. It's able to get out of the way. And so hopefully that combo effect of potentially improving labor outcomes and potentially reducing the severity of tearing, hopefully that can also help with postpartum healing because there's less trauma to the pelvic floor in general. So there's a lot of reasons why downtraining, especially in the 3rd trimester, is really important. As your body grows and gets bigger, we want to learn how to be able to let that muscle group, lengthen, get out of the way for labor. In my pregnancy program, Figure Pregnancy, I personally program labor prep circuits starting at week 28, about 3 times a week. And then I also build down training movements into the workouts themselves that help with, the lengthening properties of the pelvic floor. So that includes things like different mobility work. Breath work is the big piece. Almost, I will say every down training movement, the base of it is your breath. So focusing on the inhales of a movement is what actually brings length to the pelvic floor. So you could be doing a mobility movement like a child's pose, for instance, but if you're not adding the breath to it to allow for that relaxation and that lengthening of the pelvic floor, it's not really down training. So the breath work is the key priority here. But another muscle group or like movement group would be just getting the pelvic floor in different angles. And that is by getting the hips to move in different angles. So think like Cossacks or side lunges and normal lunges, single leg work, lateral step ups. Anything that is getting the hips in a different direction is also pulling the pelvic floor in different angles too. And that's allowing our body and our pelvic floor to get used to, lengthening and contracting and moving in different angles, which hopefully can help again with the full functionality of the pelvic floor. So that kind of answers at how many weeks do you start down training during pregnancy? My answer is as soon as you hear about it, but then prioritizing it really in the third trimester to prepare for birth and as your body is, a little bit bigger and growing and kind of changing from a center of gravity perspective so we can make sure that the pelvic floor is functioning as we, change. Number 2 is, does down training mean that you have to stop lifting? No, the two for sure coexist. And here's a few different ways that they coexist. One way is doing breath work during the lift itself so that on the lengthening piece of the movement, so thinking of a squat, as you're squatting down, the pelvic floor is lengthening. Adding an inhale to this piece of the movement can also help the pelvic floor lengthen. And then exhaling, contracting as you stand back up, allows the pelvic floor to go through its full range of motion during the move itself. And this allows the pelvic floor to be more dynamic in actual action. So we're creating this like full body functionality of the pelvic floor while we're moving and doing stuff. And that helps. That's like a piece of down training, is just allowing the pelvic floor to move in its full capacity. Prioritizing again that inhale, that lengthening piece so the pelvic floor knows to get out of the way. Number 2 is supersetting lifts with down training movements, which are obviously breath work focused in nature. And we're focusing on the inhale and lengthening piece of the down training movement. So for example, let's say you're going for like a 5x3 squat. So it's pretty heavy. Still do your squats and focus on form, focus on performance metrics. Sometimes when you're getting up that heavy, you don't want to have to focus all your mental efforts on the breath itself, because that can cause different injuries too if you're not focusing on like the proper mechanics of a squat. But after that heavy squat, maybe take a minute or two to sit in a child's pose and breathe into the pelvic floor, lengthen and, expand the pelvic floor muscles. So not only one, can we reduce tension of the pelvic floor, but it also could potentially give like a revving backup of the pelvic floor to be able to then hit more heavy squats in the next set. So just like we take rest in between lifts, just like we sleep at the end of every day to rev back up for the next day, same thing with the pelvic floor. We need it to rest and lengthen and relax so that it can have a better muscular capacity before we go back into our next movement. So this has a performance metric piece to it, but it also helps with the symptom piece as well. And then the third part, or like when to add in down training, is in warm-ups and cool downs, or in isolation as part of like a rest day, or like throughout the day, maybe you're up in the living room and just sitting on the floor, doing some different stretches and things, doing some breath work in the car. Again, just allowing the pelvic floor to go through full range of motion throughout the duration of a day, so that you're not just focusing on down training for like 5 to 10 minutes during a workout, but then staying in a clenched, tight, tension-based position throughout the remainder of the day. We kind of want to be keeping it top of mind throughout the day, as we go about our daily activities, to try to reduce tension there, to help again with that full functionality in our daily activities, in the gym, in performance, in all these different, capacities. So the third piece of this text question was, should I just keep doing what I'm doing? how did she word it? She said, in my head, I plan to just keep doing what I'm doing all the way through, but I'm really interested in maybe rest is more beneficial. So if you're not following like Figure Pregnancy or a pregnancy specific program, yes, keep doing what you're doing. Obviously looking for signs and symptoms that the load or demand is too much, but then add in downtraining movements like breath work applied with, mobility and different, positions. Obviously there's a ton of different things, and I go into those on my Instagram page and in my Figure Pregnancy program specifically. But I will say that is the main difference in my eyes between a pregnancy specific program versus modifying normal workouts for pregnancy. Pregnancy specific programs aren't about, or workouts aren't about removals and modifications and like tailoring everything back. It's more so like, what are you adding to optimize your pregnancy workouts? And downtraining is probably the like tip of the iceberg for that. So making sure we're adding in more angles for the hips, adding in more breath work, adding in more positions that allow the pelvic floor to lengthen for, the case of labor, for reduced tearing, for a better postpartum recovery, for reduced symptoms. So it's more so like, what are we adding in to help our pregnancy body, not what are we having to modify or remove that can like just keep us in the gym. So there's a big difference there. And that's why I'm obsessed with talking about my pregnancy program, because there is so many benefits besides just like tailoring workouts to pregnancy. There's what are we adding that's making your pregnancy better and could potentially stack the deck in your favor for a better labor and delivery outcome. So just wanted to do a kind of quicker podcast episode on this question because I loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and it's probably a question that a lot of you guys have as well. So I'm hoping that this puts downtraining into context and the pelvic floor in general for pregnancy situations. And hopefully you can use it in your own pregnancy, or maybe helping out a friend, or if you're a coach, helping your clients with it as well. So yeah, with that, I will see you guys in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Mother Figures podcast. If these episodes help or resonate with you in any way, it would be so helpful to the show if you could leave a review so we can get this into more moms' hands. And if you're looking for even more guidance and direction when it comes to pregnancy and postpartum fitness, I got you covered. My Mother Figures app subscription includes my Figure Pregnancy and Figure Postpartum workout programs, in addition to our general fitness programs. You'll get the day-by-day workouts you need to help you feel strong, pain-free, and labor-ready during pregnancy, and also the recovery, strength, and progressions you'll need to get back to the activities you love, full of strength and without symptoms after baby arrives. If you're local to the Brighton, Michigan area, I also host daily women's functional fitness classes, a 6-week postpartum return to fitness course, and pregnancy and postpartum consultation sessions. For those who are providers, coaches, or practitioners in the space, I hold a live Mother Figures certification course that equips you with the knowledge, tools, and confidence to train and work with this population. For information on all of these services and programs, make sure to check out fitisgettingreal.com/moms or head to the show notes for the direct link. I'm so thankful that you tuned in to today's episode, and I will catch you next time.